Hello, fellow book lovers, both readers and writers. I am Matty Dalrymple. I write the Ann Kinnear Suspense Novels and suspense shorts and Lizzy Ballard Thrillers. And I also write, speak, podcast, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the indie author. And you can learn more about me at mattydalrymple.com and at theindyauthor.com. And this is my video series, What I Learned, where I ask authors 2 questions about their latest book. What did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow authors? And what did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow readers? And I'm here today with John DeDakis. Hey, John, how are you doing?
Hi, Matty. It's good to be with you.
I am happy to have you here. In fact, John and I just got back from Creatures, Crimes, and Creativity Conference, which was super fun.
It was. Austin Camacho and his wife, Denise, run a great boutique conference. It's not overwhelming, but
Yes.
It's very, very informative.
That is a great way to describe it. That was a super fun conference. And to give our viewers a little bit of background on you, John is an award-winning author of 5 mystery suspense thriller novels, a writing coach and instructor, a manuscript editor, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and a former White House correspondent. In his rare spare time, he's an amateur jazz drummer, and he is also the host of the video podcast 1 to 1. And his latest book is Fake. So today I am asking John the 2 What I Learned questions about Fake, starting with, what did you learn from your book that you'd like to share with your fellow authors?
I think what I learned that might be of value to authors is the whole concept of seat of the pants writing. I mean, I like to plan, and I think that's important to do, but it seems as though I'm planning less and less. I'm unable to try to figure things out until I'm actually doing the writing, and it's certainly that has been intensifying in the 6th novel that I just finished the first draft of. But this was especially true in Fake as well, and that is, it was almost as if I would start my writing session with despair, not knowing what was going to happen. Then I would get the characters talking with each other, and it's almost as if the act of moving my fingers was like shedding enough light on the trail to give me an idea of where to go next with it. I'd end the session with a sense of relief and encouraged that I'd actually accomplished something. And then it was rinse and repeat. It was like the next day I'd forgotten that, gee, even though you don't know where you're going, you can still get things to happen if you just start writing and dip into your subconscious.
So do you think that you moved away from the more strict outlining just because you had a better sense after all that experience with the previous books? Like you have a better innate sense without having to go to the outline, or were there other drivers there?
Boy, that's an interesting question. I would have to think about that, because I still like the idea of outlining and I really like to know where I'm going, but I'm discovering that it's okay not to know, and that part of the creative process is that spooky subconscious that you tap into. And I kind of like that. It's almost like living on the edge and being inspired by that. And it's almost counterintuitive because the alternative is to fail, and nobody wants to fail. But I just have discovered that there's a certain energizing that happens when you just write by the seat of your pants.
Well, it's especially interesting to have this conversation after having been at the C3 Con and having Jeffrey Deaver be one of the guests of honor, because Jeffrey's like the poster child of us outliners.
Oh man, he told us that he takes 8 months to outline a book meticulously, and then when he really knows where everything is going to go and whether it's even a book that's worth writing, the actual writing takes about 2 months. And I don't think he used the word autopilot, but I got the sense, and maybe you did too, that even on days when he's not necessarily inspired, he knows what he can work on to get the job done. So he can write the book in 2 months, even if he's not feeling it.
Yeah. The other sort of twist on that I liked is I think he also said that because he had the outline, there was no need for him to write in order. And so he could go flesh out whatever part of the book was appealing to him, which was a very appealing concept to me. I I sort of do that myself, and I don't do the 8 months, 2 months division, but because what I found is I am an outliner to an extent, but there's a point at which I have to switch to, I don't like to say the actual writing, but you know what I'm trying to say. There's probably a better word, but I'll say the actual writing in little air quotes, because I find that once I start writing dialogue, then sometimes I have to go back, and things that I thought a character would do once I start writing their dialogue, I realize it's not realistic. And I end up having to go back and change things that looked good in the outline, but don't look good when I put the words in a character's mouth.
So I've got two questions. So that sounds like you're more of a plantser now, right?
Yeah.
So
And
then, go ahead.
the other word I heard that I loved, that I think was Art Taylor, and I apologize if I'm attributing it to the wrong person, but he also said that there's the third type, which is a percolator, which I'm definitely a percolator, because by the time I sit down and actually put my fingers on the keyboard, I've already drafted a lot of it out in my head. And I think all of us do all three of those things. It's not like an either, 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 but I love the percolator concept.
I like that too. And my follow-up question would be, if you have an outline and then you've been writing seat of your pants and discover something that's not part of the outline, does that then mean you've got to redo the outline?
Well, I only use the outline. This isn't supposed to be you asking me questions, but it's a
Well,
it's a
I'm a journalist, so
professional
there.
hazard. I only use the outline as long as it's useful. And I write in Scrivener. And so when I'm putting in what I actually call a frame, because there's no part of the writing craft or the publishing voyage that can't be illustrated with a lovely nautical metaphor, as illustrated by my big
Ah, yes, very good.
boat poster back there. So I love the idea of a story frame. I actually have an article in an issue of Writer's Digest about this, that you build the frame and then you start putting on the ribs and the planks, and sometimes you have to rip out, but it's not really two separate documents. I'm writing the frame in a sans serif blue font. And then as I start doing the real writing, I'm changing it to a serif black font. And so at some point I'll have like a mixture of those things, but gradually the frame just becomes the manuscript.
That's interesting. I might try to use that myself. Let's see.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting to see how very different people's writing styles are, but also how much people are moving among all these different modes, even
And
when they
you've been
say that they're
doing
not
this,
one or the other.
and you've been doing this for a long time, so you've gotten into a rhythm, right?
Yeah, yeah. And how about you? How did you find that your rhythm has evolved in the time that you've been writing fiction?
Well, I definitely like to plan because I like to know where I'm going, and that really was the way I wrote the first, I don't know, 3 novels. And I used a book called The Weekend Novelist by Robert Ray. And he basically, the basic premise is you only have a limited amount of time, like a weekend. And his book was very practical on mapping things out, and if you use his suggestions, you can write a novel in, I don't know, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever, but planning it out. And so that was really helpful to think things through, because I think a lot of people, and I think this was probably true of myself initially, you get this idea that falls in your lap and you write white hot, and you get about 50 pages in, and then you hit the wall because you haven't really thought things through. And I think a lot of people give up at that point thinking, well, I have no business doing this because I don't know what I'm doing, when really all they need to do is the spade work and the prep work to get a better sense of where they're going to go in the process. So, yeah, I started planning, but I think I've gotten a lot more comfortable with seat of the pants writing, so that I am sort of a plotzer or a plantser.
So we've shared some perspectives on what you learned from fake, some of the things that I've learned from my writing that you wanted to share with your fellow authors. And how about your fellow readers? What did you learn from fake that you'd like to share with your fellow readers?
Well, I write as a woman, a 20-something young woman who's a White House correspondent. Where did I get that idea? I've been a White House correspondent. And I started writing the novel when Trump was elected president, because I was frustrated with his comments that, journalists are the enemies of the American people. I mean, that's just not true. I mean, it is a firing offense for journalists to make things up at a reputable news organization. But of course, with the internet, people can make things up willy-nilly and there's no editor on your shoulder saying, where'd you get that? And so I think that what I wish readers would understand is a lot of the people who are wagging their fingers saying you're just fake news have never met a reporter. They don't have a clue about what goes on behind the scenes. And so that's one of the lessons I'm hoping readers will take away, is a better understanding of what goes on in order to get a story on the air, on the wire, in the newspaper. There's a lot of vetting that's involved. There are a lot of levels that stories have to go through, and reporters are people, and they certainly have opinions, but the professional does their best to keep their opinions out of it, so that they're writing to inform and not persuade. And so being able to do that in a high pressure situation takes a lot of, I don't know, takes a lot of talent, it takes a lot of skill, it takes a lot of experience. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I want readers to understand, is what it's like behind the scenes for a person like Lark, my protagonist, who is the victim of fake news. Lies have consequences. And, for those of you who do make things up just because, the truth isn't as nearly as interesting as something that you make up, just realize lies have consequences.
Some of the presentations we went to at 3Con were police officers, retired police officers, talking about how their jobs are represented in fiction. And a couple of times there were references to the fact that, like, nobody wants to read a book that realistically portrays, report writing, for example. Did you find there were things in fake that you had to adjust in order to make it a compelling read while still staying true to the story you wanted to tell?
Ooh, no one's ever asked me that one before. I don't believe that I had to change too many things, other than you want to bring a sense of authenticity to the story. But, what's really important is that you move the story forward. And to be honest, that's really what journalism is all about as well. News is news because it's new. And so every reporter, when they cover a story, especially if it's a story that's ongoing, the question is, how are you going to advance the story? And so that's what I brought to the writing process, is how am I going to advance the story? Not necessarily the news story, but the story that my protagonist is trying to solve.
And were there lessons from your journalistic background that stood you in good stead, and other lessons that you had to ignore when you were writing fiction?
Well, let's see. Probably the biggest advantage of having been a journalist, especially a broadcast journalist, is you need to write tight. You don't have the luxury of a lot of time to tell a story. It has to be done very efficiently. And I think the reader appreciates that. Even if it's an 80,000 word novel, you still want it to keep moving. You don't want to get bogged down in descriptions or backstories or data dumps that are tangential to the actual story. So I think that's probably one of the most important lessons I learned about being a journalist that I was able to apply to my novel writing.
And any lessons that you explicitly had to ignore in that different format?
Hmm. Probably not, because you want to make it authentic. And so there are, scenes where there are reporters who disagree about what the story is. There are writers and editors who clash with each other. So there's a lot of chaos behind the scenes. And I think that, that can make for interesting storytelling as well.
Well, that sounds great, and I think that I, as a reader, I'm certainly intrigued by this idea of seeing what kind of behind the scenes of what's going on, not only enjoying the overarching story you tell, but also some of these little tidbits we might learn about journalism from your book. So, John, thank you so much. Please let the viewers know where they can go to find out more about you and Fake online.
Well, thank you, Maddie. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. People can best get through to me on my website, which is, it's not that tricky. It's my name.com, but the name is tricky. It's John DeDakis, D as in dog, D as in dog, AKIS as in Sam.com.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.